This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. It's episode 374 of the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. And for today's podcast, I'm hanging out here in Minneapolis. We're in the front end of the World Brewing Congress, and we also have a summer beer festival here in Minneapolis. And joining me for this episode of the podcast is Joe Wells, head brewer for Fair State Brewing Cooperative. Welcome to the podcast, Joe.
Well, thank you, Jamie. And just for clarification, we are in
St.
Paul.
We're in St. Paul.
Yeah, the border is about 200 yards that way. Yeah, we are in St. Paul, sunny St. Paul.
We're in the Twin Cities, in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. I got it wrong I got it wrong earlier this year when talking to Tim from Barrel Theory, and he corrected me just as you have here. Nope. I deserve all of the shade that you give me for that. Our beer festival is in St. Paul at CHS Field, right there in downtown St. Paul. It's a cool spot, and it's amazing that you got these fantastic cities, this broader urban area full of so much. It's such a great place to be. For those that don't know, Joe and I went on a European vacation together last year.
It was very romantic.
Along with some other brewer friends. They called it a trade mission from the Czech Republic. But we were on a bus together for a week and traveling around, eating very well, drinking Czech beer, eating as much tartar as we possibly could.
Tartar and that the pickled cheese, the hermelin.
Yes.
Oh my goodness!
Oh, so good. I've tried making some, or my wife and I have tried making some at home. I do miss the jarred pickled cheese.
I'm still looking forward to the Craft Beer and Brewing article that is all of the different brewers' recipes of their own hermelin that they make at home, because it's fantastic.
We can make that happen. We did, in fact, if you read Joe Stang's feature story on Czech brewing that we put out last year in our lager issue, after that trip, we actually made some hermelin just as prop for the photograph on Czech brewing, and it's great stuff. That and then the Czech peppers. I mean, it was a wonderful thing. But so that's the background. Having vacationed in Europe together, here we are again. We're coming back together here in St. Paul. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about the Fair State approach to brewing American lager beers, especially what Joe's been pushing, which is finding ways to make beautiful lager beers with alternative grains and American ingredients that express and reference this both the history of American lager brewing, but also bring that into the current today and look at what's possible within taking a broader approach to grain within lager brewing. I love the idea of that. I love the conceptual idea of it, because all beers everywhere should reference the place that they're in. Mm-hmm. That's what makes beer beautiful. That's what makes it so local wherever you are. And the idea of just simply aping European lagers is just less interesting than finding ways to take inspiration from that and building a local context around it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Fair State's dive into West Coast IPAs. And we're going to talk a little bit about something you just mentioned to me, the dankness dive, because you're a Columbus cryo guy.
Yes.
And Fair State is big on Columbus cryo. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, it wouldn't be Minnesota or in general if we didn't also talk about THC beverages, because it's just wild being up here and popping into a brewery and seeing THC beverages on the menu, walking into a nice restaurant, fine dining establishment, THC beverages, edibles even sometimes. Oh. Anyway.
Yeah. If you
I
told
live
me
in Colorado, and it doesn't it takes a lot to impress me. Yeah. And I'm impressed by this. So we're going to talk about that. They've got a whole room here in the brewery devoted to those kinds of beverages and produce a lot of that. It's not going to be the main focus. After we talk about lager, we'll talk a little bit about that, of course. Before we do that, at G&D Chillers, they always strive to build great chillers. Partner with them as you build great beer, but don't just take it from me.
This is Andy Joint of Big Grove Brewery. We've been using G&D chillers from the beginning, and from our original 3.5 barrel pub system up to our production brewery, we've been able to rely on G&D to provide a high quality chiller, help us with design and layout, and provide support whenever we need it.
That's right. Choose G&D Chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring of your new G&D chiller. And Pro Brew is excited to now offer 2 to 4 week lead times on all in-stock Pro-Fill rotary can fillers and seamers. These models are available in 100 to 300 cans per minute filling speeds and are built with a focus on scalability and low dissolved oxygen pickup. This special lead time is only while supplies last, so send them an email at contactus@probrew.com or call them at 262-278-4945. ProBrew, brew your beer. I've seen those can fillers on the floor at their facility last year when I was up there for Oktoberfest. They are there. They would love to help you with your canning line. Also, are you struggling to source affordable citrus ingredients due to market fluctuations? Try Old Orchard's flavored craft juice concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates at a better price point and with a more reliable supply. Old Orchard's citrus flavored blends include blood orange, grapefruit, lemonade, lime, and tangerine. To learn more and request your free samples for pro brewers, head on over to oldorchard.com/brewer. All right, Joe, we normally kick off a little bit of background and history. Tell me yours. Where'd you come from? What was your entree into brewing, and how did you end up here at Fair State?
Yeah, so my first brewing job was in Southern California. I was the lab manager and barrel program manager and pilot program manager and wore a lot of hats at Hangar 24 Craft Brewery. I was there for about 3 years and then ended up wanting to move near family, so ended up in Canada and built a facility up there called Bench Brewing. Big facility focused on sour and wild beer. It's in I don't know if people know this, but there's wine country in Ontario. It's in the wine country. It's actually really quite beautiful. And then after a while, ended up coming back to Minneapolis. So been here for 6 years now. Came on to Fair State as lead brewer, moved up to head brewer about 2 years into that, and have just been, trying to make as much beer and weed water and happy people as I can while I'm here. So
all the things. And so tell me about Fair State.
So we are on our 10th anniversary right now. Our actual 10th anniversary is coming up in 6 weeks, I want to say. 8 weeks maybe. We started off with a small tap room in Northeast Minneapolis, very much focused on a lot of continental styles, a lot of kind of traditional beers.
I remember drinking some great Saison at Fair State back in those tap room only days.
Saison, smoked beers. It was a couple years into the brewery before they made a IPA. Hoppy lager beers, all kinds of fun stuff. And then, kind of the classic craft beer story, a distributor walked in with a checkbook and said, man, it'd be a shame if I bought your distro rights. Gave them some money and they decided to build this production facility we're in now. So facility came online about 6.5 years ago. I joined 6 years ago. And since then, we're out at 14, 15 states right now. We're going to do about 10,000 barrels of beer this year. We did about 10,000 barrels of weed water this year as well. So it's been pretty busy. We've had some interesting moments. We went through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy earlier this year. Distributor changes, all the fun stuff of craft beer in the COVID world. But things are looking good. We're making a lot of
distributor change. That's all it takes, right?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
What brewery has enough reserves to make it through something like that? But yeah. What a mess. But you're out of it now.
Yeah, we're out of it. We're making a lot of product. We've got some clients that we co-pack for, and still making a lot of beer, which is fun.
That's awesome. Well, it's so interesting to watch it kind of grow and expand like that. You also are unionized, and
our staff unionized 3 years ago. Actually, I think on Tuesday next week is when the new contract gets ratified. So it's it's an interesting brewery with a lot of complexity, but I think we get a lot of strength out of that complexity. Our staff have a voice with the cooperative. We have some oversight from a board of directors, so it's not just like, well, the owner said this, so we do it. There's a lot more.
That's right. It was a very much a co-op model early on, where people would almost like a CSA type of community supported beer program where people would buy subscriptions of some sort and pick them up at the brewery. Obviously that's evolved. This scale is a little different than that.
Yeah, very much so. I think we're up to about 2,000 members.
Humble beginnings.
Yeah, humble beginnings. But the co-op is interesting because, the the biggest thing is it allows for the board of directors, and anybody in the co-op can run for that, and everybody in the co-op gets a vote for that. They can't be employees that are in the board,
Right.
and it provides that level of other oversight and guidance. It's also like another set of resources for us. We have co-op board members who are accountants and board members who are employment lawyers and all these other like interesting skill sets that we get to tap into and say like, hey, I got this problem. How do I fix it? Which, anybody that works at a small business knows that you get a lot of problems that you've never seen before, never thought about before. And all of a sudden you have to be the expert on workers' comp or the expert on compensation. And now you get to learn really fast.
Well, it helps to have some experts on your board that can that pull that kind of thing off. Well, that's an interesting approach. Well, let's talk. Let's kind of pivot and start talking about brewing because obviously that fair state approach to brewing has evolved over the last 10 years, and now you're making beer for a bigger audience. We should also say you had a 30 barrel brew house in here. You got a bunch of 60 and 90 tanks. You're brewing at a significant scale. Also, I'm sure also bring some smaller stuff for tap room, and just as everybody is, and and also kind of balancing both of those things. And so there's two ends of that brewing program. We'll talk about both of those, but first, experience distinct transparency and juiciness with Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5. Using their Lumina technology, Omega genetically eliminated haze in the popular British 5 strain, allowing you to preserve the fruit-boosting prowess while achieving crystal clarity. It's perfect for modern West Coast IPAs. Learn more at info@omegayeast.com. And can seams should not just be handled by the OEM. Relying on outside help to confirm your product is shelf ready puts your final product and your bottom line at risk. Take back control with RSS Macklin. They provide the training and resources breweries of all sizes need to ensure the exceptional quality of your product remains the same from beginning to end. For more information, visit rssmacklin.com. That's rssmaclin.com, or email service@rssmacklin.com. Also, if you're a brewery or distillery in planning or interested in adding a brewery or distillery to your existing craft beverage business, visit breweryworkshop.com now and secure your spot in our upcoming brewery and distillery workshop this September in Fort Collins, Colorado. Opening or purchasing a brewery or distillery today is rife with challenges, and the things you don't know that you don't know could be the difference between failure and success. Invest in the success of your business with this 4-day intensive filled with panel discussions, small group sessions, technical tours, and more. Learn more at breweryworkshop.com. All right, let's start talking about lager brewing, Joe, because that's what we're here for, right? I mean, obviously. That's where we connected. That's where yours and my most crucial lager moments have happened in Europe, as a matter of fact. And so, why don't you give me an overview of what the program looks like now, and then we can kind of dive into some of the experimentation and some of the the development that you've been doing in some of these beers. Yeah.
So we do, I would say, kind of some classic American craft brewery lager beer, which is, you buy a bunch of Weirman malt, you get some Hallertau Mittelfrüh, you get 3470, and you brew a Pilsner. And it's great. And I truly love our Pilsner. It's one of my favorite beers we make. I know that it's always going to be exactly what I want. We do a collab Czech lager with Bierstadt every year. That is, it's all Czech malt, it's Czech hops. It turns out fantastic. We love it. But the thing that I am finding most interesting right now, and I am trying to work more into our schedule and work more with, is trying to use American grain, American hops, and produce more like classic American lager beer. You had these German brewers that came over. They started using American malt and found that the protein content was too high, so they started adding corn and rice, trying to make a beer that was more akin to what they were used to, and instead they created this new thing, this new American lager beer. And I should say, and this is a point that hit me when we were in the Czech Republic. Yeah, that we talk about this as if the time scale was so different, that these American brewers came, they brought this stuff from like it was 10 years after Joseph Grohl and and pale lager beer started hitting Czech Republic. Like the time frame for this development of American lager is so closely tied in
to the same history in Europe. It's just not that far off. And so with this kind of looking back in history, we always think about how, I would say, Americans love to think that it's so derivative, that we're just copying other folks. But I mean, it really almost became this parallel development for lager, where this idea that took hold with, in Bavaria and in, the Czech Republic of making pale lager using this British, malt kilning technique to make that, allow that to be non-smoky and keep it pale. Like, it just very quickly took off everywhere, took off all over Europe then, and also at the same time also took over in America. And so these are just basically concurrent developments, and the American, that American lager kind of developed on its own path, but it wasn't as if it was just some copy of it was more of the, in the same way that it was starting to take over all over Europe, it also took over in the United States.
Yeah, and it's also not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. I mean, like, pale American lager beer, the Budweisers of the world are really, 150 years old. Like, it's not that long in a grand time scale that this became the dominant beer.
Which also shows you that and this is the other crazy thing. I was just in Belgium, and the Belgian brewers are talking about how here's my other hot take. I'm going to throw this out just for you.
I love a hot take. I'm in.
Here's my hot take. Brewers out there love to bitch about, there's certain class of brewers that love to bitch about hazy IPA.
Oh, yeah.
There is one beer style that has killed more small independent family breweries than any other beer style. And it's pale lager. It is not hazy IPA.
Darn right.
If you look at it, and this is the kind of the yin and the yang of this. Like, there's good sides and bad sides to this lager development. That if you look at it, pale lager has destroyed more family breweries throughout Europe in its kind of march to dominance than any other thing. Hazy IPA can't hold a candle to it. But it's also something we love, and these. You can make beautiful beers these ways, but let's just all admit that there's not some moral high horse to the to lager brewing that's somehow like philosophically or culturally superior. I mean, this is where we are. So sorry. Now that's my hot take.
I have a hot take to build off that, though. It's because brewers hate themselves and brewers hate success. So what happens is you've got these beers that, like, hazy IPAs have made us all in the industry a lot of success, a lot of product, a lot of volume, a lot of money. Like, there are entire empires built around hazy IPA at this point, and brewers hate them. And now we have hemp beverage happening, and brewers hate hemp beverage. But that's one of the reasons why Minnesota has a lower brewery closing rate than pretty much everywhere else in the country. Hemp beverages are keeping brewers alive. And so brewers hate being able to pay their mortgage, but also, like, should probably take a step back and be like, man, hazy IPAs, they let me buy a house. They let me have a car. They pay the bills. Like, it's easy to hate, though. I get it.
I mean, let me tell you, I love a good hemp beverage every now and then.
Sure.
And, that's not like sorry.
It's okay.
And I'll tell you, I mean, honestly, after I was at the Firestone Walker Festival in June, and drank a lot of beer that day. And at the end of the night, it was, a certain brewer. It's like, yeah, I've got some of our THC beverages here. And like, you want some? I'm like, hell yeah, I do. Because I want to be able to sleep tonight after all of this beer that I just consumed. And you know what's going to be the best thing to help me get through this night of sleep without, anyway, that was that. I digress. Now we're going off on a completely, crazy other tangents. All of that's to say, like, let's not hate the things that people love that brewers make. And if making some of these things allows us to also, can continue to push the creative envelope and all these other things or historical envelopes and, make more smoked beer for me, like, perfectly fine. Go for it. Make all the THC beer you want. But back to lager, I think this idea of American lager as being this parallel path to European lager is super important to think about, not just as a derivative way, but also as a kind of co-development, kind of, just parallel corollary. And it is also developed in that kind of similar way in its own vein. So tell me a little bit more about, how you've kind of dove into those roots.
Yeah. So I think what happens at a lot of craft breweries when they're like, man, I want to make a corn lager, I want to make an industrial lager of some sort, is they buy flaked corn and they get some pale malt of some sort and they brew up a beer. I am personally of the opinion that flaked corn is kind of gross tasting. So we use corn grits, buy them from a industrial corn grit supplier. They come in a pallet from Missouri, and they're great. I've been still looking for a good local source, but there's nobody that mills corn grits in Minnesota that I can find. So we use corn grits. We do a cereal mash. It's wonderful. The brewery smells great. You're making, a couple 100 gallons of polenta basically at that point, and then we brew pale lager beer from there. We also do the same thing with rice. We get rice flour, do the full cereal mash with it. Stole a rice gelatinization process from Kevin Davey from Wayfinder that works great. We get good efficiency out of it.
Stole?
Well, I mean, I texted him and said, Kevin, please tell me how to do this right. But so we've also done cereal mashes with raw wheat before, which was really fun. Trying to extract some sugars out of those and get it to actually work without malting. And
tell me about this cereal mash project, process.
Yeah. So
and, I mean, I've watched it happen. We have a video class on this with Live Oak, as they do the same kind of thing.
Totally.
With their pre-pro lager and whatnot. Yeah, obviously it's more work to go, and you're going to start your brew day probably a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
To kick off with this cereal mash, but tell me, what the parameters of it feel like.
So for our cereal mash, we end up, it extends the brew day by maybe an hour and a half or so. We mash in all of the grain, all of the cereal grain, so corn grits in our case, and then about 25% of that weight in Pilsner malt at a saccharification temperature. We get it to convert, and then you have to gelatinize it, so that way you can actually
and that grain is there so that there's some enzymes there.
Yeah. Because the corn grits have no amylase, or they have no enzymes to them. So you've got to have a little bit of malt in there. Then that mash is pretty thin and it's pretty small. We're talking in a 30 barrel batch, it's like 250 pounds of corn grits. And
why is that one so thin?
Well, you've got to boil it at that point because you need to gelatinize the starches so that way you can actually extract them out of the grain. So if it's too thick, you end up with, literally polenta. It'll gel up and turn into a block in the bottom of your mash mixer. But you have it thin, you whip it with your rakes and your mash mixer, you hit the jackets and you boil it for 20, 30 minutes. That causes the breakdown. And then on top of that, we mash in the rest of our Pilsner malt. Send that to lauter tun, and it lauters off pretty well, actually. I would have expected it to be pretty rough, given that we're talking, 20, 30% of the mash is corn grits, it's powder, but it runs off pretty well because you've gone through a pretty intensive process with it. So we do the same thing with rice flour. With rice flour, the biggest thing is that you end up getting a really foamy mash when you're boiling it. Our mash mixer is like 37 barrels at the boil over, and it'll have like maybe 9 or 10 barrels of liquid in it, and it'll foam up to the point where it'll foam out the manway. So we end up having to hold it at about 185 F for 20 minutes. That causes some breakdown of that foam, and then we can from there bring it up to a boil at a little bit of firm cap, and it keeps it calmer, but it'll still fill 20 barrels worth of volume of the mash mixer, even with the rakes just whipping in there.
Yeah. How did you settle on the corn and the rice that you use for these lagers?
Those are your classic American adjunct grains. We've got Budweiser has it on the front of their label, the choicest rice in the world.
The choicest rice syrup in the world.
Yeah, rice syrup in their case. But then also, Minnesota has a really strong adjunct lager tradition.
Sure.
The Schmidt Brewery is just down the road. The Hams Brewery is just down the road. August Shells is still kicking out amazing lager beer out in New Ulm. Those guys are old enough that they have the original copper boats that they would float in their cool ship full of ice blocks from the pond to cool wort down. When they look at a piece of equipment, they're like, oh, that's the new pump. We bought it in 1984. Like it's a pretty amazing facility. And so there's a strong tradition of those kind of lager beers here in the upper Midwest. And, having raw malting just down the road and having such a strong grain growing tradition here, it fits the place, and it's the thing that I feel like we should be doing here.
So then you start with this idea of building this kind of grain forward American lager. How do you conceptualize the rest of the recipe around that, and then build a process to kind of execute on that?
Do
you start with the idea of what you want it to taste like? Do you start with what these ingredients can create for you? What does that create? Or are there specific things you're like, I like these ideas from these beers and I want to pull these in? What's that creative process feel like?
I generally think about when I want to drink the beer and what I want it to taste like. And then,
occasion driven.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. It's this whole our marketing team really hates me for it because I write up a beer description. I'm like, this beer is for drinking with your friends on a weekday. And they're like, what the fuck does that mean, man? I'm like, but I don't know. It just works. It works. So I think about the occasion.
You got to get up to work the next day.
Yeah.
But this is the beer that you can have a few of.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think about the occasion, and then from there, turns into like, okay, what hops do I want to use? What do I want the finish on the beer to be? What kind of IBUs do we want it to be? These beers are all very light, very, very minimal. But we do end up sometimes doing pretty big additions to the whirlpool. We get some hops in there. We get some flavor. We were pretty lucky early on to get some of that, the American Noble, which is the bract that's left over from creating Tetra cryo. And we use that in we had a core brand corn lager that we produced for a couple of years.
Tetra bract.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. Like, it gave this like little like lemon lime zest hint to the back of the lager. It was really wonderful. We still got a little bit of that. I don't think YCH makes it anymore, but I think I've got a couple 100 pounds left squirreled away just in case we can make that beer come back.
Well, and I imagine these operate now in some common lanes. Walk me through one of these beers. I would love to talk about one that you're particularly jazzed about. And how you made the decisions around that and what that, and then how it actually worked out.
Yeah. So I think the most recent one we did was called Interior People, and it was a rice lager that we brewed in collaboration with the folks at Hopewell down in Chicago. Those guys they make fantastic beer. They're really wonderful folks. So we, sat down and chatted with them. We were like, let's do a pale rice lager. We're going to sell this on draft in Chicago. 90% of the batch went to Chicago. It was 100% kegs. And we sold it in the middle of the summer. So let's get this out in people's hands when they want a pale, light, easy to drink beer. That one we used the American Noble in it. So it had that little bit of lemon lime zest thing. It was just clean and fruity.
And so this is derived from Citra, this American Noble.
Yeah.
And yet it still presents as a more, slightly citrusy, but not, but has some of that kind of, herbal, vegetal character that you would get from some, low alpha noble hops.
Yeah, because you have more plant matter versus to the oil content. You still get that all the beta acids. You still get the texture. You still get a lot of the intangibles that you get out of hop.
Texture.
Yeah, the texture.
You're saying these hops are adding to the mouthfeel in your beer.
Darn right they do. I stand by that fully. Drink a hazy IPA right out of the fermenter before it's dry hopped versus after, and it's a completely different mouthfeel. We discount things like texture in beer. We discount bitterness as driving a lot of flavor profile. We think of it as just kind of this very one-dimensional portion of the beer, but I think it's got a lot to it, and something you really got to think about when you're building these recipes, especially when you're talking about a beer that's so light and so delicate. You're not going to throw a bunch of roasted malt in this thing to dominate the flavor profile. You're not throwing a bunch of mosaic cryo in this thing to dominate the flavor profile. So you got to really think about the very small things that matter and the very small things that change the drinking experience.
I've been having this conversation more often over the last couple of months, where we are talking more and more about the mouthfeel implications of certain hops. And so, I think it's interesting to consider, you're right, beyond just the straight IBU contribution. And of course, if they're not selling this American Noble product now because then now we're going to have to drive some hype demand to bring it back here. But I'm curious, they pushed it for a minute a few years ago. It's been a little while since they launched it. I think I still have some in the freezer of our office, just back from the early days. And it didn't seem like, really took off in that kind of way. But that's interesting to hear that you found a place for it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think there's, I draw a lot of parallels between that and Columbus Cryo, which is another hop that we use a lot of, and that it's this like kind of weird thing that people don't really think about or understand. And like everybody, if you think about Columbus, it's onion and garlic, and it's kind of gross, and you use it as a bittering hop only. Like 10 years ago, it was like the dominant hop in American double IPAs because it's like dank and sticky and strong, and if you get the right lot, it's really delicious. But it's kind of misunderstood and kind of weird. And if you find the right spot for it, though, it's really good.
We can talk about that when we get into West Coast IPA. But Ian from ISM was also just recently did a podcast with him, and he's also on Team Columbus Cryo. There's a number of folks that are, they've seen the Columbus Cryo. Let's go back to talking about pale lager, especially in this kind of American context, because I think it's interesting to find ways of using American hops in this different kind of way in lager brewing that still doesn't become distracting American hops. You're not making a West Coast Pilsner out of it this way. Your goal is to just make something that still drinks like an American lager. But increasingly, like, people love light Mexican lagers. They love with lime. They love, like, those citrus flavors in particular are very well pointed in some of these very, very light pale lagers.
Yeah, I think there's some really cool American hops too that people don't think about very often. I'm a huge fan of Indie Hops sells their Crystal, and their Crystal hop it's fantastic. Like, it's fruity, it's still got a lot of beta acids, it's got a lot of texture, it's got a lot of character to it, but it's not just Cascade hops or something else that is kind of in that same realm. There's some really cool American hops that people don't think about, cluster, stuff like that have a lot of value to brewers, especially in these beers, instead of just, the like knee jerk. We've all been brewing IPAs for 15, 20 years now, and so we know how to brew IPAs, and so we brew our lager beer like we brew our IPAs, and so instead of adding 200 pounds of mosaic, we added 20 pounds of mosaic. It's like, well, just get out of that lane. Try something else. There's a lot of cool stuff out there. There's a lot of flavor out there that you can explore upon. And you don't have to be chasing the magical technique or the magical flavor thing that's going to unlock the secret door, because that doesn't exist. But there's a lot of cool stuff out there that you can try to make your product different and interesting and really delicious.
Well, I want to talk about how you then, use that, through kind of hot side, and then, walk through fermentation on some of these. But first, and this is really funny timing based on your recent comment, but first, Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. See, I swear I didn't put you, this has just happened naturally. Indie Hops breeds new hop varieties to help brewers captivate beer lovers. Brewers worldwide trust Indie's unique varieties, Strata, Lorien, Luminosa, Meridian, and Audacia, to modernize, brighten, and diversify their beer lineup. Indie also offers classics that thrive in Oregon terroir, such as Chinook, Crystal, and Sterling. Thoughtfully crafted and selected hops to meet your brewing needs. Visit indiehops.com/podcast to discover what's new in hop flavors. Indie Hops, life is short. Let's make it flavorful. And Berkeley Yeast, founded by bioengineers, yeast that's designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency, increase efficiency, and save you money. If you've been following yeast, I'm sure you've heard about their strains. Super Bloom strains make classic hops flavors. Fresh strains keep diacetyl low even with large hop additions. Tropics strains make a tropical bouquet reminiscent of the finest Southern Hemisphere hops. And they just dropped new strains that are even more futuristic. Nationwide free shipping. Mention this podcast for 20% off your first order. And of course, if you're a brewer who's also interested in distilling, subscribe now to the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast, available on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Hosted by Sydney Jones of Heaven Hill and Molly Troop of Freeland Spirits in Portland, Oregon, this podcast explores the technical and creative processes behind great spirits through conversations with some of the leading distillers working today. It's everything you love about the Craft Beer and Brewing podcast, but focused on distilling. Click on the link in the show notes to give it a listen. Let's talk about hot side on these lagers, Joe.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
So we, I think our hot side hop additions, we've really simplified. We go with a bittering charge, and then a little bit of Whirlpool addition for pale beers like
Whirlpool edition.
Oh yeah, we're wild. For these pale beers, we're talking like 11 pounds in a 38 barrel boil. So not a huge addition, but enough to get a little bit of pizzazz out of them and get a little bit more hop product into the wort without adding too much
Pizzazz.
Yeah, pizzazz.
Okay.
The thing that I think that we
But when you're talking about a batch size like this on a 30 barrel system, like time then becomes longer on all of this, and so there's potentially a longer contact at higher temperature. Like even if you were to try to cool down that Whirlpool, like it just takes longer because.
Oh yeah, I mean our knockout's like maybe 35 minutes or so. So we toss in right before the knockout starts, and you've got some contact time there, but not a ton of isomerization time. So you'll still get a lot of the beta acids out and some non-isomerized alpha, but not a ton of like true bitterness.
Okay.
So. The thing that we do for hopping rates that's interesting, I think, in these beers is actually on the cold side, which is Tetra edition. So I'm a huge fan of Tetra hop. I think it's like probably one of the coolest things that brewers have in their arsenal that most of them don't use. It's light, stable hop extract. So it's what's in all of your like clear bottle industrial lagers.
Sure.
I really don't care about the light stability portion of it.
You're there because, for the foam?
Yeah, we want the foam. We want that meringue. So we add that to most of our beers.
Yeah, it's a funny thing to have this product like Tetra that's super foam positive, but also is light stable.
Yep. I mean, we add, we're talking like 3 IBUs, basically, 3 to 4 IBUs, depending on the beer of Tetra. You get above that, and it can have some like metallic flavors and can be kind of odd. But at that level, it helps
but even
you get
at that
meringue.
tiny level,
it
has that much fun.
Yeah, I mean, in a 90 barrel batch, like in a bright tank that'll hit 90 barrels total, I want to say it's like 250 mils. Like it's nothing. But the stuff is it's strong. I wouldn't suggest tasting it before you pour it in. But it adds that beautiful foam, and one of the beers that made me reconsider my thoughts on Tetra was Duvel from Belgium. They use Tetra as an addition in that beer, and it's one of the reasons why when you get done drinking a glass of Duvel, there is still like a marshmallow worth of foam sitting in the bottom of the pint glass. It works, and it's great.
You drink your Duvel pretty fast.
Well, yeah. Doesn't everybody drink their 9% alcohol Belgian blondes fast?
Well, no, I'm not judging. Interesting. And so even in the scope of this kind of very pale adjunct lager that that's one of the things that really helps push that head retention. Yeah.
And well, corn itself can destroy your head retention, and rice isn't going to add to your head retention like barley would. So you got to rebuild the beers in that regard by adding a little bit of Tetra hop, and it works really well. Otherwise, you end up with like these pint glass of very pale beer that has just like a little bit of soap scum on the top, and that's just not very attractive.
What's the process for adding Tetra?
Oh man, we call it the Tetra Doser or the Tetra Blaster, depending on who's talking about it.
Tetra Blaster.
It's an amalgamation of brewery parts of like an elbow and a sight glass and a couple valves. We add it. Our centrifuge is kind of separated from our fermentation cellar by like 120 feet of process pipe. So we add it right at the base of the fermenter and just kind of bleed it in throughout the centrifuge run. And then you've got that 120 feet of pipe, and then the centrifuge, and then another 50 feet of hose before a bright tank for it to like mix in. And we end up getting 90% mixed into the product pretty well. You can send cans out for sampling, and they will test the alpha acid content in it, and they can identify what portion comes from the Tetra, so you can see if you're like getting good homogenization or not. So if you just like dump it in the bright tank, it'll just float on the top, and some poor soul is going to get one can that is
the foamiest ever.
Yeah, it's super foamy and also insanely bitter. It'll strip their taste buds off. So you got to get it mixed in really well.
Sure,
but when you do, it's really helpful and it works.
right before you spin it all together there in the centrifuge seems like a good time
Yeah.
to do that. Well, we just skipped over the fermentation piece of this.
Yeah.
Let's talk about lager fermentation for you.
Use the cheapest ingredients in the most expensive way possible. So, corn grits are cheap, which is great.
Sure.
Rice flour is like half the price of barley malt. So use the cheapest ingredients as expensively as possible. Our house lager strain is 3470. Our fermentation on that is, I'd say, pretty standard fermentation for 3470. And then we do, anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks of lagering time. Hold it at
Primary
30.
fermentation and conical fermenters?
Yep, in conicals. We've got a couple of horizontal tanks that we use for lagering, but we've done side-by-side tests with the horizontals versus the conicals, and the difference is splitting hairs, and it's mostly in brewers' dreams. So I'm a firm believer.
Mostly in brewers' dreams.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that it matters.
This episode's full of hot takes. I love it.
I wish I had a few more horizontals because they'd fit in our facility nicely.
Because they look really cool.
And they look cool.
And I would get more props from my brewer friends.
Exactly. You can look that beautiful picture of the live oak cellar with all those horizontals. Like everybody wants to be that brewery. So
unless you're ABGB and you're like, I really don't want to be cleaning out those tanks, we're going to do it completely differently.
Yeah. Conicals are nice. They work. Our horizontals that we have are built in the 1950s. They're old dairy tanks that we retrofitted with more cold walls so we can crash in them. And they're very romantic, but modern cylindro conicals they work really well.
Sure. And you've tasted them back to back, and you really can't discern difference there.
I think at our scale, the amount of other variation that happens in brewing, there's nothing that I could put my finger on and say like that's the horizontal tank versus the conical tank. There's enough other stuff going on. It's like, well, that's a different lot of malt, or that's a different lot of hops, or that one when we packaged, we got 17 ppb of DO, and that one we got 25. And what's the difference? So,
I'm just taking small pleasure in thinking about the text that Ashley Carter's going to send you after she listens to this, because that text is going to happen. Anyway, it just gives me.
I had beers with Ashley 2 nights ago. She and I went and had cheese curds and about 8 pints of Guinness. It was a great time.
Nice. So then after the centrifuge, you hit the bright tank, and this is after lagering then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Generally,
So you don't lager with the Tetra in the beer then?
No, we add that into the fuge.
And you're adjusting your overall bitterness, in the hopping earlier, knowing that this is going to add a couple of IBUs at the end there.
Yeah, you got to always make sure that you're accounting for that, especially in these very pale beers. We're talking beers that are like 12 IBUs. Adding 3 more on top is a pretty significant change. Sure. So, we generally are able to spund our beers pretty effectively and get into the bright tank at like 2.5, 2.6 volumes of CO2. And then from there, just a little bit of touch up with forced carb, and then can it off.
And you all are focused on, efficient and earth-friendly carbonation. You've got a CO2 recapture system here.
We've got one from Earthly Labs. It's we have it cut off from our normal CO2 bulk tank outside. So our cellar at this point basically runs off of reclaimed CO2, whereas the packaging line runs off of the bulk tank. So helps save a little bit of money. It also is better for the world around us. Anybody in the Midwest who went through last winter where we didn't get snow in Minnesota, we should probably use a little less CO2 if we can get away with it. So that's been a nice addition to the brewery.
Sure. And then, of course, spinning has its other benefits and those really nice fine bubbles. Yeah. And, since foam is obviously a big concern for you, it gives you that kind of that moussey foam that everyone strives for. Any other interesting variations on this approach to alternative grains in adjunct lager? Any other places that you've been playing with that you've found really interesting results?
We've started using it in some IPAs as well. Really? Actually right now I've got a fermenter full of cereal mashed rice flour double IPA that we brewed with Pint House Pizza. Just trying to make... basically, Joe and I sat down and we were like, we want to make a double IPA that is drinkable instead of most double IPAs where I feel like I'm, need a nap after half of it. So trying to make it lighter, trying to make it crisper.
And just rather than using, corn sugar, dextrose, like using, rice instead. I mean, it accomplishes the same goal, right?
Accomplishes the same goal. And also when you use too much dextrose, you end up with like some higher alcohols from the fermentation. You can end up with more esters out of your yeast. Our house strain for our ales is Kolsch. So I really don't want too many esters out of my Kolsch.
Man, there's so many similarities between you and Pint House. Look at that.
Joe and I are old buddies. He and I spent a romantic South American vacation together a couple of years ago. 8 years ago, whatever that was. So there are definitely some similarities to how we make beer. He's a good friend, and
sure,
yeah, definitely sent him more than a few text messages when we were first using Kolsch. He's going like, dude, what's going on? This stuff doesn't flock out. I got to brew beer. What am I going to do? And so it's a very good resource and a good friend.
Sure. So even in double IPA now, you're using the cereal mash process.
Yeah, we do it for double IPA. We've done it we did a cereal mashed corn and raw wheat IPA a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago, with Third Space Brewing out of Milwaukee. That turned out really cool. That beer was pretty awesome, actually. It's every brewer technique and process is just a tool in the toolbox. And so when you can pull it out and you can use it in the right way, and you can use it to make an interesting beer that has a little bit of a spin, provides a different drinking experience. I mean, there's enough London Ale 3 and malted oat and mosaic hop IPAs out there in the world that when you can make an IPA that is truly different, that's pretty fun, pretty cool. I think that's, the cold IPA trend of like, it's not just an IPL, it's a cold IPA. There are differences. There's a lot of ways that you can make beer different and interesting. And, when you can remember to do that instead of just cranking out the same IPAs, it's pretty cool.
Finding more complex ways to do the same thing is definitely on brand for a lot of brewers these days. So, but no, and again, can you find the difference there? We didn't talk about the rest of the mash on your lager piece though, and I'm killing the natural segue I had right there into talking about IPA, and I'm killing that to go back and talk about stem mashing and decoction on your lager beers after that cereal mash. Do you all how do you what's that approach for you generally in lager beer?
So when we do a cereal mash, which not all of our lager beers are cereal mash, we try to pick the right mash process for the right beer. So like our core brand, Northern German Pils, is just a multi-step infusion mash. We've got a Fest beer as a single decoction. We've got cereal mash beers. We really try to pick the right tool for the right product and try to, make the beer do the thing that it should be doing. So I've got a tank of a triple decocted Italian Pils right now. That's the first time we've ever done.
Triple decocted?
Yeah, triple
What did
decocted.
you want a triple decoct for on that?
We're using the Airclea Pils malt from Vireman. We wanted something that had a little bit more malt character to it. We also wanted to see if we could do a triple decoction on our brew house, which we did. So good job. Just trying to utilize new tools and also find out what that tool looks like on our system. So we really, try to engineer the beers around that.
What's a triple decoction? And I guess in that you're trying to, obviously if it's an Italian style Pilsner, then it's got to hold up to more hops. And so you want to kind of push more of that malt support for it. And it can handle that because it's got so much hop and bitterness in it. Yeah.
So for that one, we, mashed in pretty low. I don't have a recipe sheet, so I can't tell you what temperatures were there, but mashed in pretty low around a protein rest, send it to our lauter tun, and then do a pull back to our mash mixer, boil it, send it back to the lauter tun, mix it in, do that 3 times until we're at a mash out temperature, and then send it off to the kettle. And it is far maltier than I expected it to be. I think brewers, one of the trappings of one of the trappings of most of our industry coming from homebrewing is homebrewers are trying to make it easy to do in home. And because of that, you end up with a lot of these ideas like, oh, you don't need to decoct grain anymore. All the grain is so easy to use. You don't need to do all these like interesting hot side manipulations. And the reality is like, you don't need to, but you can, and it does create different flavor and it creates changes. Like if you walk into this brewery on a day that we're doing a decoction pull, it is a different aroma than on a day we're doing any of our other beers. And that carries through to the final product. We've done side-by-side tests with some of our beers. One of them, a former core brand beer, we did single decoction on it, and then we did a batch with no decoction, just a multi-step infusion, and it was, I mean, night and day different beers. It really does add character. The decocted beer had more like caramel malty flavors. It had more of those kind of intense roasty flavors. This is like a Dortmunder. It's a very small, light beer, but it definitely had more malt character, had more texture. One of my favorite things in beer, and it felt fuller and richer as a beverage. The other beer was great. I mean, nothing wrong about it, but in that beer, having that fullness was appreciated. It helped differentiate it from some of our other pale lager beers.
Sure. Just a plus on that. Yeah. Well, let's now shift and talk about IPA a little bit more, because we teased it at the top, and and I love this idea that here we are in the absolute middle of the country, in the state that's now produced a vice presidential candidate of all things. We're learning more about Minnesota on the national stage than I ever thought that it would. So, but at the same time, West Coast IPA, you obviously also make hazy IPA, but West Coast IPA is also continuing to grow and develop, and you all are playing in that too. Talk to me about the recent evolution of that program for you.
Yeah, I think we did a pretty classic thing among craft brewers, which was hazy IPA was working, so we made a lot of hazy IPA for a couple of years, but really the beers that we were drinking were the clear IPAs that we were producing at small scale. And so we really wanted to get back to making clear IPAs, making, bitter IPAs, making IPAs that were more akin to the IPAs that we drank when we first got into craft beer.
But better.
But better, yeah. Less caramel malt. So
smoother bitterness.
Yeah.
More sculpted, more chiseled. Yeah. Yes.
So one of the things that really, I think, set us up for success for relaunching in the kind of West Coast IPA space was when YCH started doing Columbus Cryo. We launched a beer that is 100%, it was and continues to be 100% Columbus Cryo. And it's called Big Doinks, a nice, Big Doinks in Amish, early internet meme beer or weed reference. And it's dank and it's sticky and it's got some onion garlic in it and it's got some like kind of abrasive qualities, but it's also like oddly enchanting and delicious. And it is like one of the staff favorites around here. Everybody here loves Big Doinks. And that beer came from the Columbus Cryo program because YCH was trying to make this new product out of Columbus and make Columbus cool again, and it worked. So they do this event called the Dank Dive that we were talking about earlier, where they have it at a dive bar down the street from YCH, and they get a bunch of brewers together, and we all bring beer that was made with Columbus Cryo, and then we smell and taste a bunch of lots of Columbus, and they give us pearl onions to cast our votes on which lots get used for that year's Columbus Cryo, and then they make a batch of Columbus Cryo, and all of the brewers use that same batch for the year. So it's a really cool program. It's really fun. Every year you meet a bunch of brewers who are from other breweries that are like really bought into this idea of these weird, dank, sticky hops. And you get to try some new products from it. It's a good time. The thing that I've found most fun about it last time was the amount of variation between the different lots. Like, you go into hop selection and mosaic, and all the mosaics taste pretty mosaic-y, and there's some variation, and there's some that are really cool, and some that, maybe just aren't really hitting all the buttons. But then you go into the Columbus selection, and it was like, we had 20 different hop varieties on the table. Like, they were all over the map, and some of them were like pretty gross, to say the least, and some of them are pretty brilliant. So there's really a lot of wheat from chaff in that selection, which is really fun. So
Columbus Cryo is an underpinning now for your West Coast program. Talk to me about how you design a West Coast IPA now?
I like to approach them generally, cracker dry malt bill. It's basically Pilsner malt, maybe occasionally a little bit of something with character, some malted oats or wheat or something. But basically,
Is this raw Pilsner malt?
Oh yeah, the raw premium pills. Raw is 20 miles down the street, and so we use raw malt for our silo malt. So very pale, very simple malt bills. Generally, a little bit of dextrose in there, maybe. But very simple. And then
if you're not doing a cereal mash.
If we're not doing a cereal mash, of course, yeah. But then for, the hopping on those, I like to try to have some like dank, sticky underpinnings, and then pair that with something fruity that it's going to go with. So one of the beers we made with recently that I really enjoyed was a mixture of Strata and Columbus Cryo. And it was like, maybe a 5-to-1 ratio of Strata to Columbus Cryo, and you could still taste the Columbus Cryo in there. It was pretty strong, but it's got this like mangoes and weed thing going on that's really fun and provides depth. There's like I think about when people make perfume, they think about the different flavors, the top note, the bottom note, the different layers of aroma that come out of perfume. I try to think about beer in that same regard of like, I don't want just like 3 hop varieties that all taste fruity. Like that's cool, but give me something that's going to be the counterpoint. Give me the contrast instead of just all meshing together into one kind of generic hop aroma.
Absolutely. Like lemon lavender or strawberry basil.
Yeah.
There's a reason that some of these kind of herbal counterpoints to even the, growth in like Negroni Amaro, it's the same kind of concept that oftentimes I'm having that kind of, herbal, spicier kind of underpinning helps highlight and add definition to some of those, sweeter top notes.
Yeah, you get that fun combination of the like easy to love flavor and the like really delightfully contrasting hard to like flavor, and together they make something that's more than either of them are on their own. That's where I think like the really interesting part is in brewing.
See, I'm a fan of prog metal, and if I'm listening to a song by say the Swedish prog metal masters Opeth, it's the same exact concept, right? Where you have a quiet interlude that feels like early Renaissance music or something that's very lyrical and soft, and when the deep growling vocals come in and the crunching power chords, it feels that much bigger, because they've established the contrast. If it were all just loud and they were all just, you just wouldn't catch that kind of dynamic nuance, and it wouldn't hit you with the same kind of power. So
I haven't thought about Opeth in a long time. That was just a nice little nostalgia train I got to go on.
There you go, Joe. There's my prog metal reference for you.
Beautiful.
Why prog metal is like using anyway, but I hear you. I like that kind of concept of thinking about those kinds of layers within the hop flavors themselves. Are there any others, that you've been really enjoying, and ways that you've been using Columbus Cryo on some of these that have been interesting to you? Are there other unexpected hop combinations that you found of?
Yeah, we did one that I want to revisit it because it was a really cool beer. It came out in the middle of winter. It was called Sestrugi, which is like an old Nordic term for the when snow gets blown by wind and gets those little waves. It's called Sestrugi, apparently. So it's a mid-January IPA, and it was predominantly Idaho 7 with just a touch of Columbus Cryo in there. And it took that like honeydew melon character that Idaho 7 has and just turned it into like a whole flavor. Instead of just being a top note and being kind of fleeting, it buoyed it and made it this whole drinking experience and made the beer a lot bigger than either of the two were on their own. I really like that combo a lot.
Interesting. Well, we're getting on in time, and we haven't even talked about THC beverages yet. Damn it, lagers! I just took all the attention away from us here. But let's talk for a minute about this, just because again, there's a novelty to it, and as I said, I actually enjoy these beverages, and THC is cannabis is legal in my home state of Colorado. Yep. I'm not a regular consumer, but I'm a consumer. And so, I enjoy I think there's a space for these products out there, and that there are people that can enjoy them. And again, just as with, hard seltzer, if it creates a relationship between a consumer and a craft brewer, and getting someone to drink something from a craft brewer, just getting them to do it, period, is hard. And once you if you can build that relationship and they explore the other things that you then have to offer because they enjoy that, then, maybe we can use some of these avenues to turn people into beer drinkers. Maybe not. Maybe they stay in that kind of space, which is also perfectly fine. You can make great beverages for them too. But I'm not opposed to, thinking about this in this kind of broader sense. And these things can obviously coexist peacefully and in a friendly kind of way together. But talk to me a little bit, what's the kind of foundation of your approach to making THC beverages?
Yeah. So we, for background, we're going to do about the same volume of THC beverage this year as we do beer. So it takes a lot of our time and takes a lot of our focus to make a lot of THC beverage for ourselves and co-packing for some other clients. But for our beverages, we like to think about it. We want our weed beverage to be like our beer in that, we make beer that tastes like beer. We make lager beer. We make IPAs that are malt and hop forward. We do some fruit stuff every now and again. We do some weird things, terpenes and stuff. But really, we focus on making beer that is what you would classically identify as beer. So when we were given the ability to start making these hemp-based weed seltzers, we wanted one that tasted like weed. Most people hit the market.
Wow.
I know, it's a bold idea.
It does feel novel.
So most people hit the market.
You don't want to make it taste like something complete like bubble gum or fruit so that people can ignore the fact that they're actually consuming marijuana. You want it to be, or THC hemp. I guess we should call it hemp.
Yeah.
Because
the legal distinction between the two matters.
Hemp.
But yeah, so we use basically our hop water base, acidified water, deaerated. We add some terpenes that we get from Abstract Labs. Those guys make great products. I cannot more highly suggest them. I'm having a beer with our sales rep tonight, I think. They make great products, so we use their stuff to flavor.
World Brewing Congress is happening, so
everybody's in town
here.
So we use those. We do one brand right now that is truly our hop water base. For our hop water base, we actually use some T90 pellets. So that one is a mixture of Citra hops and terpenes from Super Lemon Haze, which is like some designer weed strain that, I think if you lived in a legal state, you might be familiar with.
Sure.
But we have another one that uses grapefruit kush.
Which is really funny because it's this state, even though you can sell these, this is, Delta 9?
Yep, THC? Delta 9, hemp-derived.
Hemp-derived. And so it exists in this kind of interesting legal gray area.
Yeah.
There are not legal dispensaries in this state.
We have the legal framework to have dispensaries, but they haven't finished building it to where you can get the license and open your store. So right now we just have hemp-derived edibles at like a certain milligram. So we max out at 10 milligrams per serving or 50 milligrams in like a package of gummies. But 10 milligrams in a can of seltzer is a pretty good amount for most consumers.
For sure. Maybe a little too much for
me, it's sure too much. But, I know like if you're a kind of the high level consumer, it's not enough. But for those consumers, in the next 6 to 9 months, they'll be able to buy vapes and flower to smoke. And frankly, it's not like you can't find weed in this world. So
for that 5 level is a good place to be if you're going to have more than one. Know? And so
especially we're allowed to sell it in like bars and restaurants. So like, I went to a concert the other day and was able to buy a weed seltzer and drink that. And, after being at a concert for 2 hours and drinking God, I think it was double shots of Makers all night. The last thing I needed was more double shots of Makers. So I had a weed seltzer, and then I went home and slept for 8 hours. It hydrates you and it doesn't give you a hangover. So I think that's really kind of one of the areas it shines is the end of the night beverage. But then also some people 100%. Aren't drinking.
In fact, I'm remembering that Firestone Walker experience. I meant it was Smitty from Balebreaker. Who I was like, it was the best possible way to finish that night of that long day of excessive drinking. This started in the morning and then proceeded through the festival and then continued all night, and just being able to
the other
things down.
The thing that we found that was interesting was when we started selling them in our tap room, which we can't right now for some goofy reasons, but we were selling them in our tap room. You can walk in, buy a can, sit down and drink it. Is people would come in and they'd have a group of 6-7 people, and 4 of them would be drinking beer and 2 of them would be drinking weed water, and it was an absolute nothing burger. Like nobody cared. It wasn't a problem. There was a lot of doomsday, like people are going to get too high and people who are consuming THC aren't social. And it's like, have you been around people who smoke weed? Like people who smoke weed are social. Like it's not like a bad cartoon from the 80s about how they just want to sit in their basement. This isn't the devil's lettuce. It's fine. So people are drinking them socially.
And people are blending the experiences too.
Oh yeah,
right? Like we just talked about.
Yeah, you can walk in and for a while you could walk in and buy a beer and get a weed seltzer and sit down and drink the 2 of them. And as long as you were fine and weren't a problem, It was not a problem.
I'm doing the same thing even now with non-alcoholic beer.
Yeah.
Like finding myself, drinking regular beer and then throwing in an NA beer just to pace myself. Because again, we're in the beer business industry. Like I drink a lot of beer, but I also need to be able to keep my wits and manage my consumption and watch out for my health and all the other things. And so that you asked me 2 years, 3 years ago, not at all. Now, absolutely, it has a place in my own personal consumption.
I do a lot of hop water myself.
Sure.
I always find non-alcoholic beer falls in that like uncanny valley where it's too close to beer, but it's just off enough where it's like it's weird, and I don't know how to think about it right. But hop water is different enough, but still fills the like social beverage aspect. So I drink a lot of hop water. We do a hop water that's caffeinated, which is pretty cool. I like that one because it's like about as much caffeine as a cup of coffee.
Nice.
And it's 7:00 and you're having a beer with your friends, and then you have a caffeinated hop water and you're good to go to not fall asleep at 10 p.m.
Sure. So what are the biggest challenges in making these beverages? Obviously, you're talking about making non-alcoholic beverages if they've got THC in them, and so you don't have some of the protections that alcohol offers in these, which means you've got to make them stable on their own, and then also like solubility for some of these, because THC does not like to blend with water liquid very well. So there's a whole bunch of challenges on this. What are some of the big problems you guys have had to solve?
Well, luckily, the solubility is largely solved. There's some really awesome companies out there making water soluble extracts that, they hit the liquid and they disappear. We recirculate after adding THC.
And the THC is separate from these solubilizing products.
No, it's all one unit.
One thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I buy THC emulsion, and it's like 100 milligrams per gram of emulsion. It kind of looks like firm cap. It's this kind of milky white liquid, and you just pour it in your deaerated water, and it dissolves immediately. We recirculate to make ourselves feel good, and then package off. It works really well.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing, I think, especially for brewers, is stability. Like that is the big question. And really, when Minnesota legalized these hemp-based beverages and every brewery in the state decided to start making them, there were definitely some that were like a little questionable. Coffee with THC in it that doesn't have hasn't been pasteurized and stuff like that. So you got to think about the fact that there's no alcohol. The acidity, you have to monitor that yourself. It's not like beer where it's just going to ferment and the pH will be fine. You can package and sell it. You need to acidify it. You need to pick your acidification acids that are compatible with your can liners, and make sure you make a product that is safe to consume. And if there's any sugar in it, you need to pasteurize. Pasteurize via chemical or pasteurize via heat and temperature, or heat and time. you got to make sure that you put a product out that if somebody buys it, people don't think of these like they do of milk. So if somebody buys it and they put it in their fridge and 6 months later they drink it, at minimum, you need to make sure it's not going to hurt them. Ideally, you make sure that it's still at least going to get them the same effects, same drug product effects to their body, and are still going to taste decent enough. Otherwise you just end up with customers who are unhappy. And I like happy customers. At the end of the day, we're a hospitality company. We sell a consumer good, and we want our customers to be happy. So, we got to make sure that they get a good experience when they vote with their dollars and they give you their hard-earned money.
Well, I could talk about that for a long time, but again, we've been talking here for a little while. Maybe we'll just kind of close on a big picture. You've been here at Fair State for the last 6 years, and Fair State has gone through some of its own shifts, rougher time, better times. Mm-hmm. You're now coming out of it. It's gone from small to big, and is now in a multi-state footprint, making lots of beers for lots of people. And certainly exploring this kind of very creative side of the bleeding edge of the potential in craft and artisanal beverage, making things on this kind of spectrum. What excites you the most about the near term future, and what are some of the biggest challenges on the horizon that you see yourself and Fair State facing over the next 2 or 3 years?
In the near-term future, I think the things that excite me the most is like making interesting products with friends. So, right now I've got a pint house beer in a tank, and I've got a live oak beer in the tank, and we're canning a beer that we did as a collab with our former head brewer, and like being able to make beers with our friends and have the excuse to hang out and drink a beer with them and talk about the industry and feel that connection again that I think a lot of brewers start to lose after enough time in the industry. The first 5 years you're gung-ho, and then from then on you're kind of burned out. Trying to avoid that burnout and feel part of what we're doing here, I think, is really important. Long term, I would say I am cautiously optimistic for the craft beverage industry. There's a lot of doom and gloom out there. I've definitely said more than a few jokes about how the industry's dead and beer's dying and we should all move on and go work at a salsa factory or something. But I really do think that social beverage as a concept has a lot of value to our society. I think that having a cool beverage that you can drink in a social setting matters a lot. There's a reason why bars are a thing and restaurants serve fine wine and fine beer. And whether that's somebody walks into a bar and they want to drink weed water, or they want to walk into a bar and drink beer or a Negroni or whatever else, awesome. And I think that brewers are going to have to get creative, find their niche. They're going to have to find something to do. But I do think that there's like a good future for a lot of us in it, for a lot of us to exist, and for us to make customers happy and give them something they want.
You are doing that, and you're connecting flavors with experience, and connecting that to this kind of history, and as well as the occasion for people drinking those things. And I think that finding this kind of nexus of those things and bringing those all together is it's not going to be easy in the next 10 years, but it's certainly possible. And, nothing is truly easy in this world anymore. That's the nature of where we are. And
if it was easy, it'd probably be boring. So, make it interesting, make it fun.
The challenges ahead of us. I think that's a great place to bring it to a close. Choose G&D chillers on your next expansion or brewery startup and receive 1 free year of remote control and monitoring. ProBrew offers 2 to 4 week lead time on in-stock rotary can fillers and seamers. Old Orchard is the go-to source for fruit-forward ingredients for some of the biggest names in the craft brewing landscape. Omega Yeast's Daybreak 5 gives you juicy, modern hop flavors without the haze. Take back control of your canning and seaming with the experts at RSS Macklin. Trust Indie Hop's unique varieties to modernize, brighten, and diversify your beer lineup. Berkeley yeast strains are designed to improve flavor, quality, and consistency. Visit breweryworkshop.com for more information about the upcoming Brewery and Distillery Workshop this September. And if you're a distiller or curious about it, check out the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button. Please become a subscriber and support us as we bring great stories to you, great conversations like this very one with Joe here. Joe, if people want to learn more about Fair State and both all of the beers that you make, but as well as all the other beverages that you also make, where they can get them, where they can enjoy them, what they are, etc., or chasing them in person here if they happen to be in the Twin Cities, where do they find you all?
Well, we've got a tap room in Northeast Minneapolis. It's right at the corner of Lowry and Central, the heart of Northeast. And then they can also find us on Instagram at Fair State Co-op.
It's been fun talking with you again and reliving some of our memories from our European vacation together. Always good to see you, Joe. Thanks for sharing your perspective on brewing with us. Cheers.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, cheers. This podcast has been brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those who love to make and drink great beer. To learn more or to subscribe, visit beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.